Hello everyone, my name is Enes Shergoui and I will be your guide into this amazing adventure 3D rigging basics. So in this course, you will learn the fundamentals and building blocks of 3D rigging as well as the essential terms and definitions and build a solid foundation in rigging. So we will start by covering the most basic form of rigging, which is linking or parenting. We will then take a look at how we can modify the pivot points of an object. We will learn about groups and how to utilize them. After that, we will discuss the basics of working with bound objects, what they are and why they are so useful. We will see the benefits of working with inverse kinematics and apply that to our arm rig project. We will then work with control objects and constraints to finish our arm rig, and to wrap up this course we will go over the skinning process and how we can edit skin and deformations. So by the end of this course you will have a solid foundation about 3D rigging. So without further ado, let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson we are going to talk a little bit about rigging, what it is and why is it important. Okay, so what is rigging? You may have come across this term before, thrown a lot in the animation industry, but don't know exactly what does it mean. Even though the term may seem a bit overwhelming, especially for those who encounter it for the first time, it simply means setting up controls to drive a specific model or mesh, okay? It can get quite complex, no doubt, but that's just the basic definition of what rigging is. Now, would you want to rig anything? Well, rigging makes it a lot easier for us to animate objects and animate our characters. It will be impossible to do character animation without rigging, because you will need some sort of control system to set up, to animate the character with or animate the object. I think the easiest way to think about it is what it looks like without a rig. Just a sculpture sliding through the space. So what a rigging artist do is actually add bones. He put then the skin on top of it, and he add controls for animators to use so that they can grab the performance you see on screen. He is also responsible for setting up the facial rigging, kind of what does a smile looks like, and so on. So now that you understand what rigging is and why it is so essential, let's say we go ahead and move on to the next lesson. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson, we will break down the interface of 3ds Max. So here we go. This is 3ds Max. If this is your first time to use it, you may get overwhelmed by the massive amount of tools, windows, and menus. The reason why is because 3ds Max is a very robust software and it is used in many industries. It is used in the film industry, game industry, architectural, visualization, and many more. So it is evident to find all these tools and commands all over the place. But keep following along with me, because at the end of this lesson you will have a better grasp of the interface and be able to dig right into the main subject of this course, which is going to be rigging, okay? So starting with the top section over here, which is called the menu bar. The menu bar contains many commands, tools, and dialog boxes categorized by topics, okay? Some commands will have keyboard shortcuts associated with them, as you can see over here, okay? Right, beautiful. Next up is the workspace switcher, where you can change the layout of the interface based on pre-made configurations, like for instance the design standard. Let me select it, which is kind of a customized to fit the needs of architectural designers or people used to work with the Autodesk, Revit, and similar softwares. Now let me go back to the default interface. Alright, wonderful. Underneath that is the main toolbar. Here you can find many of the popular tools you will be using all the time, like for instance the link tool, the linking tools, okay, the selection tools, the move tool, the rotate tool, the scale tool, the snap tools over here, and the layer explorer, as well as the rendering buttons, okay? To the right hand side of the interface is the command panel. This is actually where you'll spend most of your time creating and manipulating your objects, okay, like so. We will go deeper into the command panel and many of its tabs as we progress through the course, okay? The bottom part of the interface contains many sections, like for instance the timeline, dedicated for the animation, as well as the playback controls and the viewport navigation tools, okay? Okay, cool. Far to the left is the scene explorer. You can find any object listed by name over here. You can select your objects from here, like so, as well as hiding and freezing your objects. You can also filter out the display from these icons over here so that you can list only a certain type of objects within your scene. Alright, excellent. And now the big real estate you see in the middle is dedicated to the viewport windows. These are actually your window to the 3D world, where you can see, okay, and manage all of your objects in the scene, okay? Cool. 3ds Max comes by default with a 4 quad windows, but you can change this configuration right from here to anything you find, or to any configuration may work best for you, like for example this one over here. Let me go back to the default quad viewport. To navigate the viewport, you can see you can use these viewport navigation tools, like for instance the zoom tool or the pan tool, as well as the orbit tool. Or a much effective way to do it is using the keyboard shortcut. If you want to, for example, rotate around your object, press and hold the Alt key on your keyboard as well as the middle mouse button, then start dragging with your mouse, as you can see. Okay, super cool. To zoom in and out, hold down the Control, Alt, and the middle mouse button, then drag up and down to zoom in and out on your objects. Okay? Notice how the zoom is taking effect around the mouse cursor where the green sphere appears. See that? And the zoom is actually very smooth, as you can see. You can also use the mouse wheel to perform the zooming, but this is sort of like an incremental zooming and may not give you the type of control you are looking for. Okay? To move sideways, simply press the middle mouse button while dragging to any direction you would like. Okay? And last but not least, to maximize or minimize your viewport window, press the Alt W on your keyboard and voila. To minimize it again, press again the Alt W and there you have it. Okay, super cool. So that's pretty much it for this lesson. You have seen the various aspects of the interface of 3ds Max. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson we will learn about parenting. Alright, so basically what does parenting mean is simply link or connect two or more objects together. Essentially what we are creating is a relationship between the objects in our scene, sort of a parent and child relationship. We have the parent, which is the master control, and we have the child object that follows the movement of its parent object. This is super important in rigging, and to show you that importance I will use this model over here, this crocodile model, which I have included in your exercise files folder if you want to follow along with me. So if I select the forearm, for instance, and using the rotate tool, E key on your keyboard, and if I start now rotating this object around, what you will expect is the hand moving along with the forearm. But this is not the case in here, okay? As you can see, the forearm is moving alone, and that's not what we want, okay? We want the hand to follow the movements of the forearm. This is very important in order to get a believable motion, okay? And the same thing goes when moving the forearm using the move tool or the W key on your keyboard, okay? And since there is no relationship between the forearm and the hand, our object is going to move alone, okay? And that's why we are getting this result. The same thing would apply to the upper arm that is moving along and which should drive the forearm and the hand along with it. But as you can see, it is moving along without affecting the others. So to fix this, we need to set a relationship between our objects, and we do so through linking, or another term you may be familiar with is parenting. This last term used, parenting, is a lot used in other packages such as Maya, so feel free to use whichever term seems best for you. Alright, wonderful. Now you may be asking yourself, how can we set up this relationship? Well, this is actually very easy to set up. All we need to do is grab the link tool found in the upper left hand side of the main toolbar, this tool over here, select and link. Then hover your mouse cursor over to the object you would like it to be the child. Okay, pay close attention to the cursor. Make sure your mouse cursor changes to a cross. Then click and hold your left mouse button, then drag to the parent object. Now, when dragging your mouse cursor, you will get a dashed line emerging from the pivot point of the child object. Now, take a closer look at the cursor. If the connection is possible, you will get this sort of icon showing up. Okay? And if the connection is not possible, you will get this icon with an X mark in it. This actually makes sense since we can't connect a child object to itself, and so the connection will be impossible. That's why we are getting this icon with an X. Okay, so keep this in mind. And always make sure you are selecting the appropriate object and make use of the icons that show up to know if you're gonna pick the right object or not. Okay, so still holding our mouse button, and when our cursor is on the top of the right object, all we need to do is release our mouse button, and there we go. We have now managed to set a parent-child relationship between our two objects. Okay, great. Now if we take the forearm and start rotating, the hand will follow properly the movement of its parent object. The same thing goes if we use the move tool and start moving the forearm around. The hand will follow also the movement and the translation of the forearm. Okay, cool. Now to undo back, all you need to do is press the Ctrl Z on your keyboard. Alright, beautiful. Now we need to take care of the arm. So with the link tool selected, okay, from the upper left hand side of the main toolbar, this icon over here, hover your mouse cursor to the child object, which is in this case the forearm, and once the cursor icon changes to a cross, click and hold left mouse button, then drag your mouse to the parent object, which is the upper arm. Make sure your mouse cursor icon changes, then release your mouse button, and voila. If we now test this out by grabbing the rotate tool or using the E key on your keyboard, if we start rotating the upper arm around, take a look. Our arm is now moving wonderfully. Alright, this is looking awesome. Beautiful. The upper arm is now the parent of all objects and is controlling the whole thing. And basically the forearm is driving the hand along with it. Okay? Beautiful. This is looking fantastic. How exciting is that? So essentially, that's how a hierarchy is made. And to see clearly this hierarchy, we can use something called the schematic view. And we can find it right over here on the main toolbar, this icon over here where it says schematic view open. Once we click on it, we'll get this new window, which is sort of a window to 3ds Max scene object. We will find every object in our scene listed in this sort of hierarchical representation. So essentially we have the upper arm, which is the parent object of all of our arm. Okay, we have the parent object of the entire set at the top, here the upper arm, this one over here, and moving down this sort of funnel represented by this green line, we have the child object, which is the forearm or the lower arm, and the forearm is now also a parent object for the hand. Okay, we have now the parent object, which is the upper arm. We have its child, which is the forearm, and the forearm is also a parent object of the hand. Alright, cool. Now to navigate around this schematic view, You would use the same keyboard shortcuts you use normally when navigating around the viewport. Middle mouse button to pan around the view. Control Alt plus the middle mouse button to zoom in and out from the view. Or you can simply scroll your middle mouse button to zoom in and out as well. Okay, so that's it. Okay, cool. Now, to unlink a specific object from its parent with it selected, we can use either the unlink tool found in the main toolbar next to the link tool. Here is the unlink tool, which is kind of a chain that is broken. Okay, this is the unlink tool. Or if we pay close attention to the schematic view, you will find the same icon over here, unlink selected, this one over here, and the same thing goes for the link tool. We can find the link tool on the main toolbar, or in here in the schematic view, this is the link tool. It is called in here connect, but they function the same way. Okay, so as we have said, if we want to unlink a specific object from its parent, we can use this button over here, the unlink selected, or the unlink from the main toolbar. And there we go, the object has been successfully unlinked from its parent. And now if we move the lower arm, the hand is not moving with it. Okay, so beautiful. Now if we want to connect the objects back together from the schematic view, we will take the hand, the object we want it to be the child, and we will use this connect button and we will drag the same thing, okay, as we have done previously in the viewport. Okay, we will click and drag to the lower arm objects, and there we go. Now if we test this out, if we grab the lower arm and start moving it around, all is well. Now the hand is following properly the movement of the forearm. So that's basically what parenting is and how to use it. Right? So that's pretty much it for this lesson. We have seen what is parenting and how to use it. In the next lesson, we will discuss object pivots. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson, we will learn what pivots are and how they can be modified. So, pivots are basically the points around which an object move or rotate. As you can see, it is represented by this axis tripod, okay, that you can see, this one over here at the center, okay. And so when we would like to, for instance, move an object around using the W key or using this icon, which is the move tool, which does the same, or if we want to rotate using the E key, okay, or this next icon, which is the rotate tool, this one next to the move tool, this is the rotate tool. What you will notice is that this axis tripod changes in order to represent the tool we have selected. This is actually called the gizmo. We have a gizmo for the rotate tool and a gizmo for the move tool. And when we start rotating or moving our object around, we are actually doing it around this axis tripod at the center, this one that I have showed you, okay? Pay close attention to the movement of this object. When we start rotating or moving this object around, we are actually doing it around this axis tripod. which is the actual pivot point of the object. This is the pivot point of the object. All right? So that's the definition of the pivot point. Now the question is, how can we adjust the position of this pivot point? Because as you can see, with the actual position of our object's pivot point, we are not getting a realistic behavior of the arm, okay? The upper arm instead should rotate from around the shoulder, this spot over here, okay? The same thing goes for the forearm, which should rotate around the elbow location, this spot over here. And the same thing goes for the hand as well, which should rotate around the wrist area. Okay, so the way, let's undo back by pressing the Control Z on our keyboard. So the way we're gonna adjust our pivot point's position is by heading over to the hierarchy tab, this tab over here. Then under the pivot section, we need to select the first option, Affect Pivot Only. Now when we do that, if we have the upper arm, for instance, selected, let's turn this option off and on to see the difference. If we turn this option on, we'll get this new thick axis tripod showing up that we can grab and start either moving around or rotating. But let's focus more on just positioning our pivot to the spot where it should be, so that we can get a natural behavior when we start moving the upper arm around. Okay, so let's make sure to place the pivot in the correct spot. So using the Move tool or the W key on our keyboard, let's bring this to the side in the X-axis. Let's move it just a bit forward. Let's continue adjusting the position in all axes. Feel free to turn on and off the wireframe mode by pressing the F3 on your keyboard to see exactly where we are placing the pivot of the upper arm object. Okay, this looks beautiful, right? Okay, cool. So once we do so and place the pivot in the correct position, it is now just a matter of clicking again on the Affect Pivot Only button to exit this mode. And now when we grab the Rotate tool and start rotating our upper arm around, all right, take a look. Now we are getting a much more believable type of motion, which is very crucial in cases like these where we want to get a realistic type of articulation. All right, cool. Let's now do the same for the forearm, okay? Let's select the forearm first, then using the Affect Pivot Only mode, let's make sure to place our pivot at the elbow location, just like so. Let's center this even more, just like that. And once we get it at the correct spot, all we need to do is click again on the Affect Pivot Only to exit the mode. And now if we start rotating the forearm around, okay, take a look. This is looking much more beautiful, okay? And we are getting a lot better movement of the forearm. All right, beautiful. Let's now do the same and select the hand this time, and using the effect pivot only mode, let's grab the pivot point and move it to the wrist location and center it. Okay, let's turn around our object to see better the actual placement of our pivot point. Okay, this looks beautiful. So now if we exit the effect pivot only mode and start rotating the hand, all right, take a look. We have managed to correct the movement of the hand, and we are getting much more natural type of motion from the hand. All right, this is looking fantastic. Cool. This is looking awesome. As you can see, we have managed to correct the movement of our arm, forearm, and hand. All right, great. So now if you want to, for instance, to do the reverse and adjust the position of an object, for instance, the hand, without affecting its pivot, you can use this second option, affect object only, and that way, when you use it, if we now select our object and start moving it around, we are not affecting its pivot point, we are just moving the actual object around. And this can be very useful in many cases where you want to only adjust the position of an object without affecting its pivot. And so now if we exit the effect object only, take a look, the pivot remains in the exact same position it was before, and only the object has moved. Okay, this is not looking great, so let's undo back, because I wanna just to show you if you wanna use this technique, because it is very helpful if you want to only adjust the position without affecting the pivot. All right, amazing. So that's pretty much it for this lesson. We have learned about pivot points and how we can adjust them. In the next lesson, we will learn about groups. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson, we will learn about groups. So basically, you can think of a group like a container. We can take a collection of objects and have them stored within that group. It is almost like linking or parenting. So essentially, that group will drive everything stored in it. All right. Now the question is how we can use these groups. Well, let's say, for example, that we want to take our head object and store them underneath a group so that we are able to control it as one unit. In our case, we would want to grab all of our head objects, okay? Then from the group menu here at the top of the interface, we'd want to choose group. 3ds Max will ask us if we would like to rename our group, and yes, why not? It is a good idea to rename our object to stay organized. So let's call it GRP underscore head. Then click on the OK button. All right, now watch this. If we select our head model, we are instead selecting the group. And we know that because its name is showing up right over here at the top in the command panel. This is the GRP head. And so when we start now rotating, all right, take a look. We are now controlling the head as well as the eyes, teeth, okay? And everything that belongs to that group we have created. How cool is that? Now, let's say if we want to select just the eyes, okay? Because if we try to select the eyes right now, we are actually selecting the group, okay? If we try this again and try to select the eyes, we are instead gonna select the group, as you can see. The same thing goes for the head. We are instead selecting the group. And so how can we do that? How can we select the objects inside of that group and still have access to select the group itself? Well, to do so, we'll grab the group first, okay? Then under the group menu, we will choose this time open. Now we will have this pink brackets appear over our contained objects that are part of the group. So notice, if we now grab the eyes, now we are actually selecting the eyes. As you can see right over here, we have the left eye selected. We can start moving our objects around, as you can see. Also the head model, okay? Also notice this, we still have access to our group, and if we click on the pink bracket, we will select the group. As you can see, we are now selecting the GRP head, and so we can move it around, okay, just like so. And all is well. Pretty cool, right? And again, it is the parent of our head object. So we will see the entire head follows. So that's basically how we can group objects together. It is a very simple but yet a very widely used tool, especially for rigging objects. Now, let's say that, for instance, we want to add an object to this group. Well, all we need to do is select that object. For instance, just to show you this, I will add the hand model, okay? And so all we need to do is select the object that we want to add it first. Then from the group menu, we will choose attach. Then we will pick next our group by selecting the pink bracket. And take a look, our object has been added successfully to that group. And now if we start moving our group around, right, the object is now part of the group and everything follows properly. How exciting is that? Now, what if we wanna do the reverse and this time remove a specific object from the group? Well, to do so, we will simply select that object, for instance, the head that we have added. Then from the group menu, again, we'd want to choose this time detach. Now, the object is no longer part of the group. All right, beautiful. If you want to adjust the actual pivot of the group itself, as you can see now, it is right over here at the top. We can still select the group itself, and under the hierarchy tab, we can use the effect pivot only mode, okay, as we have seen previously in the previous lesson, and we can move this to the position we would like. Let's move it right around here at this spot where it should be, so that we can be able to rotate our head and get some nice and believable motion of our head. All right, this is looking now awesome and much better. All right, great. Now, what if we wanna get rid of this group? Well, we can go ahead and to the group menu and choose either the ungroup or explode. But before we do so, you can see how they are grayed out at this moment. The reason why we get this is because our group is currently open, and so we need first to close it. So we will select first the group, okay, by clicking on the pink bracket to select it. Then under the group menu, we will choose the close option. And now when we do so and with our group still selected, let's go ahead to the group menu again, and this time we will choose either the ungroup or the explode commands. Both function the same way. Okay, I will select explode and take a look. The group has been removed, okay, entirely from our scene. There is no group now in our scene. And to check this, we can use the schematic view by clicking on this icon over here at the main toolbar. And as you can see, there is no group at all. And to see this clearly, if we undo back to bring back our group again, let's undo back a few times. All right, now take a look. Here is our group. Okay, and now when we select again the group and close it, then ungroup it, voila, it disappears entirely from our scene. And now we don't have any groups in our scene. All right, so we have learned in this lesson about groups, what are groups, and learned how to utilize them. In the next lesson, we will learn about bones. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson, we will learn about bones. Alright, so bones in 3D work the same way a human being bones work. So any object or model attached to these bones will be driven by them as the bones transform as they move around. Okay, so let's say we go ahead and see how these bones work in 3ds Max. We can access the bone tools from the animation menu, and here is the bone tools. A new dialog box will appear. Actually, this is gonna be your best friend when working with bones. You can do a lot of cool things with this dialog box to get the results you need when creating bone objects. From here, what we will go ahead and do is head over to the top view by pressing the Alt W to minimize first the viewport, okay? Then right click in the top view to activate it, and Alt W again to maximize this time the top view. Alright, the reason why we are using this top view is we want to draw these bones. Let me hit the G key to turn off the grid, okay? And so the reason why we are drawing our bones in this top view is that we want to draw the bones in a way that follows the flow of the arm, okay? To see this clearly, I will go ahead and select first the object of the arm, okay? And I will change their wireframe color by heading over to the color palette, and let me choose a much more lighter color. Let's go ahead and work with this yellow. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks beautiful. Okay, as I have said before, we want to draw these bones, okay, in a way that will follow the flow of the arm, okay? This flow right over here, okay? So we want to draw the bone object in a way that follow this flow of the arm. All right. Notice how we have this slight bend at the elbow that is creating this sort of angle. As you can see, this is what we want. And this is mainly for working with inverse kinematics. Don't worry, we will discuss inverse kinematics in the next lesson. But what we want is this bend in the elbow, okay? This bend. And we want to draw our bones to follow this bend and this angle so that the arm will function correctly when we apply inverse kinematics to it. So again, we will discuss inverse kinematics in the following lesson, okay? So don't worry. Now, what we will do now is turn on the wireframe mode by pressing the F3, okay? I have already done that, so make sure to press the F3, okay, to see the wireframe of your object, to see where the bones are gonna be placed. We will then choose the Create Bones command from the Bone Tools dialog box. We will click once. Let me move this to the side. We will click once at the upper arm, specifically at the shoulder area. Then we would like to click at the elbow area. Next, we will click at the wrist, and we can click once more at the tip of the fingers, just so we can see the flow of the chain. Now, to finish the creation process, we will right-click once, then right-click again to exit from the Create Bones. So we want to right-click twice. All right. Now, depending on the size of your bone object, it might be just fine for you. But if you ever need to go ahead and correct the size of your bone object, this will be very easy to do. Here's how you can do it. Let's first go back to the perspective view so you can see this. We will use this time a keyboard shortcut to save some time. We will use the P key on our keyboard, and voila! Welcome to the perspective view. Alright, awesome. So if you ever need to change the size of your bone object, make sure to select first the bone object you would like to change. Let me move this to the top so you can see this clearly, okay? So we will make sure to select first the bone object we would like to correct its size, and from the Modify tab, and by adjusting the width and height parameters, alright, take a look. We are able to modify the size of our bone object to get the results that work best for us. Alright, so I will go ahead and bring everything back by hitting the Ctrl Z to undo. I think these results were fine for this setup. I just want to show you how to adjust the size of your bone objects if you ever need to do so. Okay, great. So we have created now a bone chain. And notice, as we start to move these bones around, let's start with the upper bone, and as we start to rotate this, notice how we have created this automatic hierarchy, which is awesome. This saves us a lot of time. Go into the forearm. As we start to rotate that, all right, everything is working beautifully. Go into the wrist. All is well. So that's another benefit from using the bone object, is that we create this automatic hierarchy, this automatic parent-child relationship. So with bones, we can go a little bit more complex and build an entire character rig with them. Okay, great. So let's say we go ahead now and place these bone objects within the arm. Let's grab the upper arm bone and start moving this down into place. Okay, let's move it down just a bit until we have managed to place it exactly where the actual arm model is. Alright, this is looking great. We can check the position of our bones from all of our views if we want to. Okay, this is looking great. Let's activate first this perspective view and hit the T key to bring the top view, and all is well. Our bone chain is placed correctly. Okay, now feel free to rename these bone objects if you would like to stay more organized. For example, we can take the upper arm bone and we can have it renamed from here, from this section over here in the command panel. Okay, we will have it renamed to upper arm underscore bone. The next one will be called forearm underscore bone. Let's select the next bone object. This one will be called wrist or hand. Feel free to select whichever you want, underscore bone. And this last bone over here, we'll call it bone. We'll call it first wrist underscore tip bone. Alright, beautiful. And so now that these bone objects have been placed where they need to be and renamed, it's time to do a little bit of linking and have these bones to actually control the arm model of our crocodile friend. We know how to link our objects already. Let's go and start with the hand. We'll select first our hand model. Okay, the object we would like to be the child. We'll select then the link tool from the main toolbar and we'll link the arm model to the hand bone. We'll press with the left mouse button, we'll click and hold, then drag to the hand bone until the icon changes. Okay, so we'll now release and there we go. Alright, let's go and do this again for the forearm. We'll select the forearm model. We'll select then the link tool. We'll click and hold and link to the forearm bone. Okay, one more. We'll take care of the upper arm mesh now using the schematic view. Okay, so we'll do something different just to show you the various ways we can link our objects. So we will use this time the schematic view. We will go ahead to the main toolbar and we'll click on the schematic view icon. Alright, we'll select the upper arm mesh. We'll look for it. Let's see where it is. We can select it from the scene and here it is. It is highlighted in the schematic view. Okay, and all we need to do is we'll go ahead and select the connect. It is the link tool. It is just with a different name. So we will select the link tool. We will click. We will look for the bone that we would like to be the parent of our upper arm mesh. let's see, here is the upper arm bone. So we will click on the upper arm mesh and then hold our left mouse button and drag to the parent object, which is the upper arm bone. Alright, we have now created a new hierarchy. As you can see, this new hierarchy. Before, what we had is the geometry that was parented one to another, but now we have them all linked to their bone object. And so let's go and check the power of working with bone objects. Let's select the upper arm bone. We'll grab the rotate tool. Let's close out the bone tools window and start rotating that around. And alright, notice we not only have a bone controlling the arm, but notice where the pivot is. Here is the pivot of the upper arm. Okay? And so the pivot of where we're linked to has overridden what we had before as our pivot, which is super cool. No need to go ahead and modify the pivot of the child object. So again, if we start to rotate the forearm bone around, now we are getting some really nice elbow movement. Pretty cool, right? Same thing goes for the hand. If we select the wrist bone and start rotating it, alright, this is looking fantastic. Great. How exciting is that? Alright, so these are the basics of working with bones inside 3ds Max, what they are and why they are so useful. In the next lesson, we'll learn about inverse kinematics. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson, we will learn about inverse kinematics. Alright, so before we understand what inverse kinematics or IK is, we first need to understand forward kinematics or FK. FK is simple as taking an object, then rotating it. An object that is part of a hierarchy. So in this case, if we select the forearm bone, and as we start to rotate this, notice this is what forward kinematics is. It's simple as that. Okay? So forward kinematics is just rotating an object that is part of a hierarchy, and the children or the child object will follow along with the movement of their parent. So this is the forward kinematics. Inverse kinematics, on the other hand, is going to inverse the rotation of our bone object based on the location of an inverse kinematics goal. So to show you how inverse kinematics work, let's say we go ahead and create this inverse kinematics goal so you can understand exactly what it is and what it does. Before we create this, and in order to have an easier time making this inverse kinematics system, let's say we go ahead and use the layer explorer feature inside 3ds Max so we can store our model in a new layer and hide that layer. So the way we do this is by first selecting the layer explorer, this icon over here, manage layers, and once we click on it, we'll get this new dialog box. So this is the layer explorer, and to add a new layer, we would want to click on this button over here, create a new layer. Okay, now with this new layer added, we'd want to select all of our objects in our scene except the bone object. Okay, let's select first all of our objects in our scene. Okay, we will then deselect our bone object by holding the Alt key while clicking to deselect the bone objects. And once we do this and select all of our crocodile objects, and with our new layer selected, we would want to click on this button, Add Selected Objects to Highlighted Layer. Now all of our selected objects have been added successfully to this new layer, as you can see over here. Feel free, if you want to go ahead and rename this new layer to stay organized. So let's have it rename to model underscore layer. And now by having this new layer that contains our 3D model, we can simply go ahead and hide or show our model, freeze or unfreeze if we would want the model to be unselectable. Okay, if we freeze our model, we'll not be able to select it. We can do all of these things all from just one location, which is great and super helpful in many cases. Now it's a good idea to check this default layer, because as we hide this model layer, for instance, if the model layer is checked like this, and if we were to create new objects, they are going to be added to this model layer, which is already hidden, and hence our new object will be hidden as well. So we want to make sure to check that default layer first, and that's going to be the active layer. So every new object will be added to the default layer, which is by default is visible and it is not frozen. All right, so let's bring back our model layer by showing it. Okay, and with that said, let's go ahead and to focus more on working with just our bone objects, we'll go ahead and hide the model by clicking on this section over here. This model layer over here, I have gone ahead in a previous lesson and created it just to organize my work. Okay, so now it is empty and not needed. We can go ahead and click on the delete highlighted empty layers, and there we go. So now with our model layer hidden, we can go ahead and create our inverse kinematics handle. First, we want to select, let's close this window out, and we want to select first the upper arm bone, which is the parent in this hierarchy. We would want then to head over to the animation menu, and from the IK solvers submenu, we would want to use the HI solver, which stands for history independent solver. All right, from here we need to pick the wrist bone and take a look. We now should be able to see a line. We should also see this new cross shape in the scene, and this is actually our IK go. It's basically a way of manipulating the chain that is tied to the inverse kinematics. Okay, if we select the IK go, here's the role of our IK go to manipulate the chain that is tied to this inverse kinematics system. All right, and so now with our IK go selected and using the move tool, the W key on your keyboard, Notice this. We can start moving the IK goal around, and here we can see exactly what inverse kinematics does. So again, we are inversing the rotation of our bound object in the opposite direction, as you can see right over here. How cool is that? Now, what will this be useful for? Well, this would be great to use for arm animation. For instance, a character dialogue, or the character needs to rest its arm or hand on a surface, but we still need to animate the upper body. We can use inverse kinematics to get this done very easily. Alright, great. We now have managed to create an inverse kinematics system. How cool is that? Now, what's really cool about this is if we were to head over to the Motion tab, the fourth icon in the command panel, this is where we can access the parameters for our IK system. For instance, underneath the IK solver properties rollout, we have what's called the swivel angle property, which is used to animate the elbow. Let me show you this clearly. If I select the IK goal and move it inward, just like this, if we now use the swivel angle, we will be able to animate the elbow. Okay? And to see this clearly, I will go ahead in the Layer Explorer and bring back our model layer by clicking on the lamp icon. Okay, and so now, if I were to go ahead and use the swivel angle again, as you can see, we are now able to animate the elbow. Alright, this is super cool. How exciting is that? Let's right click on the swivel angle property to zero it out. Alright, and so this is gonna be it for this lesson. We have learned about inverse kinematics. What is the inverse kinematics? Again, it is just rotating our bones reversed based on the position of an IK goal. As you can see, again, it is great for arm animation, even for legs. We have also seen the benefits of working with inverse kinematics. And so that's pretty much it for this lesson. We will go ahead and discuss control objects. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson, we will learn about control objects. Alright, so control objects are simply objects that we use to control other objects with. So essentially what we will do in this lesson is we will learn how to build a control object for this arm rig we have been creating in this course. Now, what we will go ahead and do first is select our IK goal, okay? Then from the Motion tab and underneath the IK display options rollout, in the goal display section, we can go in and increase the size of our IK goal. Feel free to press the control key while dragging to increase the amount faster, okay? We can go in and now increase the size until we get something that is a little bit easier to select. I think that a value of 40 will work out very well, and sure it does. Now, when building controls, when we are creating control objects for our rigs, there are a few rules we would like to keep in mind. We want to make sure that the control object is going to be easy to select. That means making it large enough so we don't accidentally select anything else. We also want to make sure that we can clearly understand where that control belongs to or what it will control. Then lastly, we want to make sure that the control object is clean. So in case we ever need to go back to this default position, in our case for the arm, this default position, it will be easy to do that. So let's say we go ahead and get started. First, we will head over to the Create tab within the Command panel, and under the Shapes category, let's choose the Circle option. Now, to create this circle object, all we need to do is click on the grid. Okay, I have pressed the G key to turn on the grid so you can see clearly where this circle is gonna be created. So to create the circle, all we need to do is click on the grid and drag to specify the radius of that circle. Okay, and to finish the creation process of this circle, all we need to do is right click. Alright, from there, we would want to reposition this new control object to the place that should control. So to do this, we need to align this control object to this IK goal. A quick way to do this will be to use a tool called the Quick Align in 3ds Max. So we will select first our circle object, then we will press the Shift A on our keyboard. Notice how our cursor changes. We are now in the Quick Align mode. If you want to, you can use this tool over here in the main toolbar. This is also the Quick Align tool. So you have two ways. Either use the Shift A on your keyboard or press this icon on the main toolbar. Both do the same thing, okay? And now all we have to do is simply go ahead and select the object we would like to snap to. That's going to be our IK goal. All right, boom. So take a look. We have managed to align now the control object to our IK goal. Beautiful. Now, once this is in place, we can see that this circle is definitely easy to select, but chances are we want to make this a little bit smaller because at this moment it is looking a little bit bigger than what we need. And so let's grab the circle and grab the scale tool or the R key on your keyboard and start scaling our control down just a little bit in all axes by grabbing this center gizmo, okay? Let's scale this control down just a little bit, okay? All right. Just a little bit more. All right, this is looking fantastic. Beautiful. Now to make this control even more beautiful, what we can do is with our control still selected, let's go to the Modify tab, the second icon in the command panel, and under the rendering rollout, notice we can enable this option, enable in viewport, and watch what that's gonna do. That's gonna add some thickness to our curve, again making it easy to select, and it will not render in the end, okay? I press the Shift Q to render. All right, no control in our final rendering, which is super cool. Now to control this thickness, you can adjust this thickness value over here to your liking. As you can see now, if you want the control to be a lot more thicker, you can increase the amount of thickness or decrease it if you want the opposite. I will leave this at a value of 3 centimeters. This is looking beautiful. Alright, awesome. It is also a good idea to rename our control object to stay organized. We can call our new control object control underscore arm, since it is controlling the arm of our crocodile friend. Alright, excellent. So we have made sure that our control is easy to select. Also, we have made sure that we know exactly what's that object is going to control by where we have placed this. So the next thing we need to do is clean this object up. To do so, we want to Alt right click, then we'll choose Freeze Transforms. This is going to make it possible for our, let's move this to the side, see clearly. Oops, let's Alt right click in here, of course with our arm control still selected. We want to choose Freeze Transforms, and what's that going to do is it is going to make it possible for us to go back to this default position very easily by essentially resetting the transform values that are applied to this control object. So these values right down here at the bottom of the interface that we have currently on our control will be reset all to 0. This will be the new default position for our control. Okay, so let's Alt right click to show you this clearly. We'll select our object or control object, then Alt right click. We'll choose then Freeze Transforms. Now we'll click on the OK button. Now notice this. If we go ahead and move our object around, okay, just like so. If we were now to select our object, then press the Alt right click, then this time choose the transform to 0. Take a look, the control object pops back to its new 0 position, which is beautiful and very helpful. Alright, excellent. So that's how we make sure our control object can get back easily to their default position. The next thing we can go ahead and do is get rid of any old data that may be stored within this control object. So essentially, we are resetting the X form. We are cleaning up any old data that can cause some issues later when we set up our control to work, okay? Or to control something. The way we do this in 3ds Max is by grabbing first the control object we would like to clean up, then from the Utilities tab, this last icon over here in the command panel, we will choose the Reset X Form command, then Reset Selected. Now, with our object still selected, if we were now to go back to the Modify tab, notice this new modifier called X Form that has been added to the modifier stack of our control object. It has been added automatically when we have clicked on the Reset Selected command. This is actually what's now containing the old data of our control object, and to have our object cleaned up, we need to get rid of this new modifier by collapsing it down. So to do so, we will head back over to the Utilities tab, then this time we will choose the Collapse command. Alright, we have here two options in the output type section. The second option, which is mesh, this will essentially convert our control object to an editable mesh when we select the collapse selected. To show you this clearly, if I now select the second option and click on the collapse selected, if I were to go back to the modify tab, here's our object converted to editable mesh. Alright, let's undo back by pressing the Ctrl Z. And now the first option will leave the type of the object as it is, meaning that if we had previously an editable poly, it will remain that way. when we collapse it. The same thing would apply if we had, for instance, an editable mesh, or for instance, a primitive object. Now, if we select the first option, modify our stack result, then click on the collapse selected button. If we were to go back to the modify tab, check this out. We have now managed to clean up our control, and now it is an editable spline thanks to that first option we have chosen. So with that first option, it has preserved the type of the object. So it was a 2D shape, and now it is still a 2D shape. It is just converted to an editable spline, but it is still a 2D shape. How cool is that? The next step to do now is to actually have this control object control something, right? So for that, we will use constraints. In the next lesson, we will see how to set up this control object to control our arm rig. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson, we will use constraints to set up our arm rig. So for our arm setup or the arm rig, we will use constraints. Now, you may be asking yourself, what are constraints? Well, constraints allow us to lock down, transform parameters of an object with another object or by another object. So basically, we are driving the transform values or parameters of an object by another, or using the transform values of another object. We have constraints that will allow us to lock down the position, the rotation, and the scale. And what's great about constraints is that they can be animated and have its weight or have that connection created to be turned on and off. So if we don't want, for instance, that constraint to work at a certain time, we can simply turn that weight off and actually have that animated. So we have a lot of control and flexibility with constraints. Alright, beautiful. So let's go ahead and finish this up by constraining the arm rig we have created to the new control object. Now to do so, we will first select the object that will be constrained. In this case, it is going to be our IK goal. So with it selected, we would want to constrain its position by going to the animation menu. Under the constraints submenu, we will choose the position constraint. Now from there, we would want to pick the object that will be constrained to. In our case, it is going to be the new control we have just built. Alright, now as we select our new control curve, and as we start to move this around, right, take a look. We are now driving the IK goal, and with that, the entire arm rig is following, which is super cool. Pretty cool, right? Now, to get our control back to its default position, all we need to do is press the Alt, right click, as we have learned in the previous lesson. Then we will choose transform to 0, and boom. Alright, this saves us a lot of time. Okay? And so now let's say we go ahead and finish this up by working on the wrist. So essentially we would want to constrain the orientation of the wrist to the rotation of the new control. And by doing so, we will control the rotation of the wrist by this new control we have just built. And by doing so, we will then have created an efficient control that manipulates not only the position of the arm, but also the rotation of the wrist, just using one control, which is going to be super cool. Again, to do so, we would want to select first the object that we would like to constrain. In this case, it is going to be the wrist bone. Then from the animation menu, under the constraint submenu, we'll choose this time the orientation constraint. It is located all the way at the bottom of this menu, okay? Here is the orientation constraint. Next, we need to pick the object we would like to constrain our wrist bone to. That's going to be the new control. Now, when we do so, watch what's going to happen. You see that the bone kind of shifts because the orientation of the constraint is trying to match the orientation of the wrist bone to the orientation of the arm control. So that's basically what happened. Now, chances are you don't want that bone to shift. So to get it back to the original position, all we need to do is head over to the motion tab. Okay, of course, with our wrist bone selected, we need to go back to the motion tab, and under the rotation list, we would want to scroll all the way down until we get to the orientation constraint rollout applied to this wrist bone. And specifically, we'll need to look for this option, keep initial offset. This is actually what we need to check. And now when we check that on, the bones pop successfully back to its original position. So here's before. As you can see, the orientation constraint is trying to match the orientation of the bone, the wrist bone, to the orientation of the arm control, which is, I think that none of us want to do so, which is not a great thing unless you want that, but you have this option in case you need to preserve the initial orientation of the wrist bone. And so if we check this option on, all right, now we have the wrist bone pops back to its default position, which is super cool. Another really cool feature about constraints is this option over here. All right, let's now check this out. If we were now to select our arm control and start moving this around, we should notice a difference in our wrist. Notice how the orientation of the wrist is no longer following the forearm. Now we have full control over the rotation of the wrist. And to check that out, if we were to grab the rotate tool, and as we start to rotate our arm control around, all right, take a look. We are now controlling the wrist, and our friend says, "Hello, everyone." Pretty cool, right? So we can reposition our arm rig and rotate the wrist just from one control object, which is super cool. Now, what we have just done is great for a lot of things, and especially for hand length. So what that means is we can go to our upper arm bone, okay, and using the move tool, just to show you this, if we start to move that around, notice that the hand is going to stay planted. Sorry, our friend Crocodile, we don't want to hurt you, but I want just to show our friends how this is working. So as I said, the hand now is going to stay planted. And if we try to do this before, what we should get at that moment is the hand will actually rotate because it's gonna follow its parent, which is the forearm bone. And just to show you this, if I undo back a few times to get to that moment, let me undo back a few times. Notice now, if I were to select the upper arm bone and start moving this around, okay, notice the difference. The hand, as I have told you before, is going to follow the rotation of its parent object, that is the forearm bone, because it is not constrained to anything. But now, being that we have locked down the orientation of our wrist bone using the orientation constraint to our new arm control object, that's no longer gonna happen. All right, this is looking wonderful, and we have managed to create a nice control object that controls not only the arm rig but also controls the orientation of our friend hand. All right, so that's basically an overview about control objects and constraints inside 3ds Max. In the next lesson, we will talk about scanning. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson, we will learn about scanning. So, scanning is the process of taking bones or any objects that can influence a mesh deformations and having those bones or having those objects deform your character model. So anytime you see a video game, for instance, or you're watching a movie and you see these 3D characters jumping around or moving around, they have actually a skeleton built into them. And that skeleton is what is driving their deformations or their change of shape. Okay? Alright, so what we will go ahead and do now is learn the process of scanning. Again, this is going to be just an overall overview about scanning. So how do we have these bone objects that we have in our scene to influence and deform this arm model? Well, first, what we want to do is select the arm mesh, and then from the Modify tab under the modifier list, we'd want to choose the skin modifier. Okay, to grab it faster, you can press the S key so that every modifier that begins with the S will show up. Okay, here's the skin modifier. Let's go ahead and choose that. Now that the skin modifier has been added successfully to our arm model, the next step we want to take is to simply scroll a bit until we get to this bones section, which is found under the parameters rollout. From here, we will go in and choose this add a button. Now, something to keep in mind is that even though we have bones shown right over here, we most certainly don't need to use just bones for our scanning process. We can use any object we would like, which is a very interesting and a great thing in 3ds Max. Now, once we click on this add button, we'll get this new select bones dialog box that we can use to specify the bones we would like to add. Okay, in our case, we would want to add the forearm bone. Let's click to add to our selection. We would want also to add the hand bone as well as the upper arm bone. Now, this wrist or this hand tip bone, that's the very last bone at the end of the chain. That's this little small bone over there. Okay, I don't like to add that to our bones list. That will influence the mesh. That's because that will just add unnecessary work when it comes time to editing the deformations that we get initially as we add these bones to the skin. And so we will leave that last tip bone out of the list. So we will select only the forearm bone, the hand bone, as well as the upper arm bone. Then we will hit the select button. And voila, our bones have been added successfully as influence objects. So essentially, these are going to be the bones that will influence our mesh. Now, notice this. If you were to go and select, for instance, the forearm bone, okay? If you want to, you can select it from the schematic view. Here is the forearm bone. So if you are having hard time selecting it in the viewport, all you need to do is grab the schematic view, and here is the forearm bone. Now with that selected, as we start now to rotate this using the rotate tool, you can see now the mesh is being driven by the bone. All right, this is looking fantastic. Okay, and now you may be asking yourself, how is this working? How we are getting this kind of result? Well, you can think of the scanning process sort of like parenting in some sort. And to show you exactly what I'm talking about, if I select, for instance, the mesh or the arm model, and from the modify tab under the editable poly in the vertex subobject mode, if I now select, for instance, these vertices right over here and start moving them around with the move tool, what's actually happening when scanning is that we have parented in a way the vertices that make up our model to the influence objects that are, in our case, the bone object. And so we have gone ahead and taken these bones, okay, and said, all right, I want you to be the parent. For instance, the forearm, I want you to be the parent, and I want these vertices, for instance, to be your children. Okay, so that's basically what we have done and how skin works. And the end result is like this. When we do that and we apply the skin modifier and we add influence objects, we get this sort of parenting of the vertices, and each vertex is parented to a specific bone objects, okay, in our scene. All right, so this is how I said the scanning process and how it works. Let's now stop the lesson here, okay? In this lesson, we have learned what is scanning and how it works. In the next lesson, we will take this a step further and we will discover how to edit our skin deformations. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson, we will learn how to edit skin deformations. Alright, so the skin editing process is going to be really intuitive and simple, just like the process of applying skin and adding influence object. So let's say we go ahead and see how that works. Now, first, we need to make sure we are not under any sub-object level of our model, because if that's the case and we want to, for instance, under the sub-object mode, and if we want to move the upper or the forearm bone around, they will not deform the mesh. As you can see, we are not getting any results. So selecting the arm mesh, we will select the editable poly, and always we want to expand that and make sure to click again on the vertex or the any sub-object mode to exit from that sub-object level, okay? Just like so. And if we now move our forearm bone around, right, all is well. Now you should be good to go. All right, excellent. Now, what we can do next is select every bone object, okay? To do that easily, what we can do is either select the parent object of the entire hierarchy and double click on that to select the whole hierarchy, or simply we can select, for instance, the upper arm and head the control page down and that will also select the entire hierarchy. Now, what we need to do after we have selected our entire hierarchy is Alt right click, then freeze transforms. So we can always go back to this default position. For instance, if we were to go ahead and move our forearm bone around, if we want to bring that back to its default position, to the skin position, all we need to do is Alt right click again. Then this time we will choose transform to 0 and boom. And so this is how we can do that. Beautiful. Now to show you where the skin process will come very handy, as we take the forearm bone and as we start to rotate this, notice this unnatural gap we are getting around the elbow. Let me show you exactly this spot over here, this unnatural gap. This is the issue that we want to correct, okay? And so let's now add a little bit of bend to the elbow so we can see clearly the issue and fix that, okay? Now, if you want to, you can either add a little bit of bend just like this, or you can animate this bend so you can actually see better the deformations and the differences you will get in real time, okay? So in order to do that, you can simply select your bone object, okay? Then we need to make sure that we turn on this auto key feature, and now dragging, for instance, your time slider to frame 20, we'll grab the rotate tool, and with our forearm bone still selected, we'll start to rotate the bone, okay, to the point where we can clearly see the issues of the arm, okay? Okay, this is looking great. Now to finish this up, we will turn off the auto key by clicking on the auto key button again, and voila, we have now managed to create this really cool little animation. Pretty cool, right? We can go a little bit, we can bring this arm or the forearm bone a little bit to the back. We can activate the auto key again, okay? Then in frame 0, what we can do is press the Alt right click, then transform to 0 to bring the forearm bone to the skin position. And now we have two extremes to work with, okay? This is looking much better than previously. Now we can work more effectively on fixing this issue we are getting in our arm, okay? So now to correct this issue we are getting in our arm model, it is just a matter of selecting our arm model, then from the modify tab under the skin modifier, we want to enter the edit envelopes mode. We can do that either by clicking on the edit envelopes mode, just like so, or by clicking on the skin modifier name itself. Both do the same thing, so let's go ahead and click on the edit envelopes mode. All right, what we should see now is these lines, okay? We should also see that our mesh has been color coded as well. So first, these lines that we see represent the bones that actually influence our model, okay? Whereas the color coding is a way of telling us how each bone is influencing our model. So the red means that these vertices are fully controlled by this selected bone object, which is in this case the upper arm. So the upper arm is now influencing these vertices color coded in red, with 100%. Okay, the orange and yellow areas, they mean that we are getting half the amount of control. So we get this nice blend as we start to manipulate these areas, as you can see right over here. If we scroll the time slider, the orange and yellow areas have this nice blend, and that is shown by this orange and yellow colors. Now the blue areas, to show you this clearly, I will select the forearm bone. As you can see, the blue areas means that there is hardly any control from that selected bone, and the gray area means that there is no control at all. Okay, so what we need to do to edit the skin deformations of the arm is to go ahead and select this endpoint. Okay, let's scroll our time slider to the point where we can see better the issue we are getting, and we can select, for instance, our upper arm bone by clicking on the line that represents it. And so we can select now this end point that we can see in this yellow line, okay, this end point. And when we start dragging this using the move tool, let's bring this to the back. What we are basically doing is editing this capsule that we see around the arm. So that's exactly what this is. This is an envelope capsule, which is great for initially fixing your deformations. All right, so with that endpoint selected, if we go ahead now and start translating this backward, we should be able to see better results automatically, which is super cool. And take a look now. The upper arm is getting a lot better. We can continue to move this to the point where we get rid of this gap. Okay, this looks beautiful. Let's say we go ahead now and fix the forearm in the same way. We'll select first the forearm bone by selecting the line that represents it. Again, we want to select that endpoint, this one over here, of the yellow line. And now we can start moving this to this point to the back. And take a look. We are now getting different results. We can continue to adjust that until we remove that gap entirely. Okay, let's continue doing that. Let's move this just a little bit to the back. We can go back to the upper arm and select the endpoint again and move this backward, okay, or forward until we have managed. We can go back and forth between the two bone objects until we completely remove that gap. All right, this is looking beautiful now. All right, awesome. This is looking now a lot more natural and realistic, and we can get a lot more better results when we are going to add a turbo smooth, which is what we're gonna do in just a moment. So we have managed now to fix this in hardly no time at all. If you want to, you can continue adjusting this until you feel happy with the results, okay? Just like so. I think that is looking awesome. Let me move this just a little bit. Okay, this is looking beautiful. So these capsules really saves us a lot of time. They're not all we have as editing tools, of course. They can help us to initially fix these deformations, but there are still some steps we need to take to get much better deformations. Let's now make the deformations a lot better, and to see the actual results, we can add in a turbo smooth modifier from the modifier list. Let's press the T key to bring up our modifiers that begins with the T letter, and here is the turbo smooth. And now when we add that, as you can see, the turbo smooth will add more geometry to our model, and we'll subdivide it and add a lot more geometry, and with that our deformations will get a lot more smoother, and we're getting a lot more natural and realistic deformations. As you can see, this is looking fantastic, as you can see, with just a little bit of work and using just the capsules available in 3ds Max. Alright, this is looking fantastic. And so that's gonna be it for this lesson. We have learned a process of editing our skin deformations using capsules. In the next lesson, we will talk a little bit about what we have learned in this course. Hello everyone and welcome. In this lesson, we will discuss what we have covered in this course. Alright, so all of the techniques and tools we have learned in this course comes out to this. If I now go ahead and click the play button in the bottom section of the interface, all of the techniques comes out to this, bringing our characters and objects to life in a way where it creates the illusion of life for the audience. So just to break down what we see in front of us, if I go ahead to the Layer Explorer, let me first press this button to stop the animation. If I now go ahead and open the Manage Layers or the Layer Explorer, and if I now unhide the Control Objects layer, what we're going to see is something that looks very familiar, right? So these are the curved shapes that are causing the character to move. If I select, for instance, the head controls, this red curved shape, grab the rotate tool with the E key and start rotating this around, notice the effect of this control on the head of our character. You can do crazy things with this control, and the character agrees. How exciting is that? The same thing goes if we select, for instance, this chest control, start moving this around. Take a look at the effect that has over the movements of our character. We are controlling the upper section of the body, specifically the chest and the head as well as the neck. If I now select, for instance, the head or the hand control or the wrist and start moving this around, we are controlling the arm movement with this by using the move tool. And if I start rotating this control around, we are controlling the rotation of the wrist or the hand, much the same way we have seen in this course when we have gone through the process of creating that control objects for the arm rig we have built in this course. All right, and so all of these controls, let me undo back a few times to get everything back to the default state. Okay, just one more. And if I now scrub the timeline by selecting the time slider and moving it around, take a look at how each control object is working in conjunction with the others to create this nice looking animation. Alright, this is looking fantastic, as you can see. And so now, if I select, for instance, this bones layer and unhide that and hide again the control object layer as well as the mesh layer, here's the character skeleton. And again, it is very similar to our skeleton, to the skeleton of the human being. Here's the spine, here's the thigh, here's the shin bone, okay, the upper arm, and here is the forearm, and also the hand as well as the fingers, okay. So these are just bone objects with different shapes. If you want to get shapes like these, just select specific bone objects, and from the Modify tab, you can play around with these parameters we have right over here. And also you can enable the side fins, front fins, and the back fins, and control their appearance by adjusting these parameters until you're happy with the shape you have. Okay, so this is the method you can use to get results and shapes like these we have in here. All right, awesome. And so now, as you can see, you can go ahead and start using what we have learned throughout this course in your own projects, or build upon these techniques and discover new creative ways to accomplish your own rigs and create awesome rigs like this one. I would like to thank you for watching, and I hope you'll learn something that will be of use and value to you. Thanks again, and see you in the next course.